Hello guys, welcome to the 8th part of Angular-10 series of tutorials. This is a continuation of part 6 and part 7. In the previous tutorials, we understood data flows in one direction, that is from component TypeScript to HTML template in both string interpolation and property binding. But there are few cases where we need to must and should use string interpolation. Similarly, there are few cases where we need to use property binding for sure. Let's understand this in a better way. Interpolation is a special syntax that Angular converts into property binding internally. So it's a recommendation to use property binding in most of the cases. But there are few cases where we need to use string interpolation as mandatory. For example, when we need to concatenate strings, we have to use string interpolation. In this example, we are concatenating two strings. One is the hard-coded string have a good, and the other we are getting from the getTime method. In this type of scenarios, we need to use string interpolation. Similarly, when we set an element property to a non-string value, we must use property binding. In this example, isDisable is a Boolean property, and we are assigning to the disable property of a button. So we have to use property binding in this kind of scenarios. With this understanding, let's go to the Visual Studio Code and do this practically. We are back to Visual Studio Code. We have an input field with a value property, and the value property is taking concatenating strings. One is the hard-coded, the other string we are getting from getTime method. Let's see what getTime method is written. The getTime method is written a string called morning. So the expected output should be have a good morning. As we are concatenating two strings here, we are using string interpolation. With these changes, let's launch the browser. So we are able to see the complete concatenated string inside an HTML field. The concatenated string is have a good morning. Okay, let's try to achieve the same by using property binding. Okay, let us add one more input field and try to concatenate using property binding. And I have added it. Let me save it. Okay, if you notice, the application is not compiled and it is throwing an error. Let me get rid of this code and add a button that takes isDisable property by using property data binding. The value assigned to this isDisable property is false. Hence, the button should be in enable state in the browser. Let's launch the browser and let me refresh it. Okay, the button is in enable state. Now let me add one more button field and bind the data using string interpolation. And the expectation is both the buttons should be in enable state because we made isDisable property to false. And if you notice, the one that we use property binding is working fine and string interpolation is in disabled state. So whenever we are assigning a non-string value, whenever we are trying to bind a non-string value, we have to use property binding instead of string interpolation. Let's have a discussion about security concerns when we use string interpolation and property binding. Let's flip to the slides and understand that. Both string interpolation and property binding protects us from malicious content. Angular data binding sanitizes malicious content before displaying it to the browser. So we don't need to concern about security issues when we are using both string interpolation and property binding. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.